Manager and Knowledge Aware Consultant at Auros. And as always, please keep your comments and questions going. I think we're going to mostly kind of do the Q&A at the end of your presentation, right, Josh?
Yep.
Okay, all right, take it away.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Amy. Like Amy said, we're going to talk a little bit about how Auros uses Auros in this presentation. And I'll kind of go through at a high level what our learning points are, kind of the agenda. We'll talk a little bit about the background for this presentation itself. We've done this now, I believe this will be the fourth time that we've done it. So we'll talk a little bit about that, why we started to do it. We'll then give some updates on some of the use cases that we have. So we'll kind of look at the life cycle of those and how they've matured over time. We're then going to talk a little bit at the end about the maturity of the knowledge aware implementation. So we'll go through that and kind of reference back some of the background information that we talked about. And then we also have the usage at a glance slide. So we saw that in Jeff's presentation, Jeff Moffa's presentation earlier today. We'll take a look at that, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the data that isn't necessarily on that slide, but is associated with the maturity of our implementation at Auros Knowledge Systems. So from a background perspective, some of you may be familiar with this particular process, but essentially when we talk about doing the knowledge aware, doing a knowledge aware implementation, there are different steps. We go out, we educate, and we do projects, we do more projects, and we start to get to this point where there's demand-driven growth and enterprise capability, or like Jeff talked about, the knowledge operating system. And it was about 6 or 7 years ago we started talking about using Auros to manage the implementations of our software at customer sites. So we kind of went through, we had a small team at the time, it was pretty easy to communicate back and forth. But as we started to grow, that communication became more difficult, right? And even when we had the small team, there would be things here and there that maybe you don't remember or you don't necessarily think apply to this particular workflow that you're onboarding. So as the team started to grow, and as we started seeing some value behind, making sure that we're reducing recurring mistakes and we're applying best practices, we started using the software to manage that project or that process, excuse me. So we're going to go through the life cycle of what that looks like. We also had some questions that people would ask us at the conference and in other interactions about, how do you use the software? And we really started to promote this idea of knowledge aware being a concept that's applicable to a lot of different things, not just the things that had been used on traditionally in the past when the company started. So that's the high level of the background. We started going into the processes, what is it that we use? And we started to kind of communicate the different use cases that we had internally, because they were different from the things that our customers were doing. So the first one of those use cases is our seed project process. And if you saw the presentation last year, we kind of walked through the life cycle of it, but that's what we were just talking about, onboarding workflows. This is kind of what it looked like when we started. And as we've gotten to the point where our team is growing, we're doing more projects, we're applying this technique in a lot of different ways. The best practices in ensuring that we're going to execute a project properly, I really don't know how we would do it if we didn't use the knowledge aware technique and if we didn't manage it in Auros. So it started off here as we started to learn more about the process. It kind of morphed. We didn't have a whole lot of information. I mean, we had information, but we kind of laid the steps out. And as we started to apply it, we started to learn that it maybe would be better if we reduce things. So this was kind of the second iteration of the process and what it looks like. And then that's advanced even more to the point where, in March, when we all started working from home, we had fewer interactions in the office. There were just less conversations, but we had a place where everyone went to manage their projects. So we wanted to see how we could increase collaboration amongst the group. And as you can see here in this latest version of the process, we've started to introduce these peer reviews that are directly in the process of managing the project. So where we kind of did those things informally, or we'd have project updates in the past, we now hold peer reviews for the project at multiple different places throughout the life cycle of it. And we've actually we've started to understand some of the risks that are associated with the project even more, because those peer reviews are structured, right? We're using the knowledge aware technique, we're using standard work, as the peer review, as opposed to just having conversations that may be ad hoc and maybe won't include all the different aspects of potential risk for a project. So this particular process, through the work from home situation that we're all in right now, has given us a mechanism to really start to drive things into the activity that we do based on the changing needs of our group. So the second process that we talked about in previous years and is very essential to what we do is the factory of our software, right? So we design software, we sell that software, and it's very important that we do that efficiently, that we do it effectively, that if we make a mistake, we don't make it again. So we started using the software to manage that process. And this is just one of the phases. We have like 5 different phases, but this is kind of what it started like. We had different activities that were happening. Jeff mentioned earlier in his process, Jeff Moffa, or in his presentation, that we had about a 16-month release cycle. We've taken that process, we put it into Auros, we started managing it because we wanted to be able to deliver code to customers faster. We wanted to reduce the amount of defects that were in the code. We wanted to increase the amount of changes and features that we could get into the software. So we started managing this process using the knowledge-aware technique. And it's kind of molded over time. It's shifted based on things we learned. So this is kind of the second iteration of that. As we learn more, we were able to reduce it, start focusing on activities that were value added, take the ones that maybe didn't provide as much value out of our process, to the point where we then started to split things up into multiple phases. And now today we have a fairly straightforward process. There's standard work associated with it. One of the things that you'll notice if we go back to some of these, we just had steps in this process that we knew we had to do them, but the standard work maybe wasn't mature. It wasn't quite as defined as we'd like it to be. Now we're at a point where we have standard work associated with all of our activities throughout the software factory. And then we have different items within the factory where we're assessing risk. So anywhere where you see this lightning bolt, we're assessing different risk at these points in time. And anywhere where you see this assessment icon, there's standard work that needs to be done in order for this particular activity to be completed. So again, similar to the onboarding, the workflow onboarding process, the improvements that we've made, taking our release cycle from 16 months down to 3. We've now released the software over the last 4 releases. We've published a release date at the very beginning. And because we understand the process, we understand the milestones, we've released at the published date without any slips for 4 straight releases. And that's while reducing the release cycle and the time as well. So doing those things, I don't think really would have been possible if we weren't using the knowledge-aware technique to understand our process, understand the best practices, and then when we understand them, ensure that they get applied moving forward in the software factory. One of the other processes that we talked about in the past is, personally, I have taken on a management role at Auros in the years past. It was something that I wasn't very good at. I don't know that I'm even good at it now, but maybe I am. But what I wanted to do is start understanding how we can provide feedback to employees. We wanted to do reviews and be able to do it in an efficient manner. We started this process. The story that we kind of had from last year, there were 15, 20 questions. As we got into these reviews and we started talking to people, we were asking, what do you get out of this review? And generally the response was, well, the conversation is good, which is a good thing. We want the conversation to be good, but we also want to be able to pull, areas where we may be able to improve out of these reviews, right? We want them to have a purpose, not just be a good conversation. So we were able to refine what we were doing in those meetings using the knowledge-aware technique to the point now where we have 4 or 5 questions that get asked. We have a lot of other information that now happens in those reviews because we need it to. We recently started monitoring and tracking like personal objectives in the software. So the ability to monitor and track those in association with a review is really convenient for us. And now we're at a point where this process is matured. You can see we have standard work on all these different items, and understanding where we want to improve, how we want to improve, going back and being able to look at reviews for the past 3 terms is something that is really valuable to our organization. It's helped me a ton to be able to see what different areas I can improve in from a management perspective. And just, I think it's really increased and improved our ability to communicate across the team and across the organization. So in addition to those use cases, we have a few things that we also have started to do. Jeff talked a lot about how we've really started to take off from a knowledge-aware perspective. So some of the other use cases that we have, we do our expense reports in Auros. So we were using other processes. We were using document-based processes in the past. We did a seed project on expense reports. We understood the process. We started to put it into the software. We started to apply this knowledge-aware technique. And we've now been doing our expense reports for some time in the software, which is kind of a unique use case. We don't have a whole lot of customers that are doing that. I'm not aware of any customers that are using Auros to run their expense reports. But as we start to see, challenges with communication, challenges with repeating mistakes, people filling their expense report out wrong, what we're able to do with this particular process is communicate, best practices, communicate the knowledge around how to fill the expense report out directly in the place where people are submitting the expense report. So we've had a good amount of success with this particular use case. In addition to that, we took our implementation workflow and we've now started to expand that. So we don't just want to focus on the seed project, right? Because there's stuff that happens after the seed project. Excuse me. There's stuff that happens before the seed project. So we've started to expand into our business development group. A lot of the different things that they do, it helps us to collaborate, the continuous learning, communicating things across multiple different people in the organization, not requiring them to be present for certain experiences, but rather be able to understand those experiences and get that information delivered to them as they go through the process, has been a big benefit for our organization. We've done that over the past 12 months as well. In addition to that, like Jeff talked about in his presentation, the security management system is something that is absolutely required when you're in a business like ours. So we had a software that was doing that. We had teams that were put together managing information. And when we looked at it, we thought, this kind of sounds like Auros would be really good to manage this security management information. So we did a seed project on the ISMS, which is the standards that we use. And we put that into the software. So now we're able to bring people up to speed quicker when it comes to being able to manage security, whether it's incident response or the other things that Jeff talked about earlier today. We've had quite a bit of success with the ISMS workflow in our software and applying the knowledge-aware technique to it. And then, like I mentioned with the employee reviews, we've also started to take personal employee objectives. We track those in Auros now. One thing that you'll notice here, with expense reports, with employee objectives, those are very sensitive topics, potentially. The employee objectives and the employee reviews for sure. So we're able to manage that information, capture it, apply this knowledge-aware technique, but still be secure. So, one employee is not able to see the information for another employee's review. The objectives, we actually want people to see each other's objectives because we want to promote positive objectives and meeting the objectives so people can see those. But we've been able to incorporate the management of employee objectives into the actual process, which has been a really big time saver and just an efficiency gain for us. So if we come back to kind of the process of getting started and how this works, we started 6 or 7 years ago with just one workflow. Over time, we've gotten to the point where we did adjacent developments, and we now are starting to see the enterprise capability really come into play. So I don't think we've gotten there yet. I would say we're definitely at demand-driven growth where we have people now, acknowledging the value. They see the things that Auros can do, the way that the knowledge-aware technique can be applied to them, and how it can provide benefit. So we definitely have gotten to the point where we're still doing adjacent developments because I guess every development technically would be adjacent, but we're no longer really having to go out and sell the concept or sell the use of the software in certain areas. We're having people come to us and talk about, I have this workflow, I have this opportunity. I think it would be good for Auros. So the slide that Jeff showed a little bit earlier, just revisit this and talk a little bit about some of the data that goes into it. Like we said, we have 3 systems that have been decommissioned. We have 32 distinct workflows. And just to talk a little bit about, the arc of implementing the knowledge-aware technique and kind of how this works. We've done 15 seed projects that we've gotten to completion in 2020 alone. So of our 32 distinct workflows, they started to grow. And in the last 12 months, I guess it's not even 12, right? In the last 9 or 10 months, we've done 15 seed projects and onboarded 15 new workflows to get to this distinct number of 32. So we're certainly on the trajectory where we're trying to get to enterprise capability. We can probably have some debates about whether we're there, whether we're not there, but we are seeing the way that we manage our knowledge, the way that we capture, share, and reuse that knowledge. We're seeing it transform as we continue to go, down this road of knowledge aware. Like Jeff Mayhew said, it's a journey. We've certainly seen a ton of benefit already, but there's a lot of potential for the things that we can do moving forward. We're excited about that. I have a long list of seed projects that we want to run at the organization. So we're hopeful that 15 this year, gets to 25 by the end of the calendar. And then next year we do even more seed projects and we continue to apply this knowledge aware technique to the different things that we do. So I think at this point, that was the content that we had. Amy, do we have any questions?
We do. Chris, he's from GM, and he's wondering, how do you decide to use an assessment versus rule processing engine in the method?
So for us, I think it's a good question, Chris. We actually had a similar question. I'm not sure if you were in the advanced sessions or the beginner sessions or the breakouts, but a similar question, like how do you know whether to use a value table? How do you know whether to use those things? And to me, I think it's hard to answer that question every single time the same way, but it comes down to a balance of the maturity of the information that you have. The places where we use the rule processing engine, we're doing one of two things. We either have items that aren't necessarily that mature, and we're just trying to track them before we develop the standard work, or we have metrics that we're tracking. So some of the rule processing engine stuff that you saw in our methods is specific to tracking KPIs and associating risk with the project. So we have a lot of activity that's going on in Auros, and we're using the team board functionality and the KPIs associated with them to kind of write that risk data to the assessment, and that gets evaluated there. So I would say the maturity of the information, sometimes focusing on what the actual purpose of what you're trying to capture is. But as you develop standard work, you can use the rule processing engine to track decisions. And then once that standard work is developed, a lot of times we'll replace the rule engine with standard work, which would have knowledge packets that each have their own rule engine within them.
Great. So Josh, Jeff is saying, thanks for the information, first of all, and he has a question. How do you approach having the entire process in one large method K-pack versus having multiple smaller method K-packs? And at what point does a process need to be broken up into smaller methods?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I think there's some differing opinions on that. My opinion is that I always err on the side of keeping it in one, and then the end user experience and the amount of information that gets in that method as it starts to mature and grow will kind of tell you whether you need to break it up. So in our particular instance, we had a phase in our process, and excuse me, the timing that was associated with that phase just started to grow, and the activity was bigger and bigger as we realized, well, we need to do this, that this is something that we need to put here. So from an end user perspective, when we opened it up and looked at it, it was just very difficult to consume, right? Because there was so much content. So in that particular case, we split it into multiples. My personal opinion is always kind of err on keeping it in one and breaking it up as the user experience requires, but it's not always an exact science, I guess.
Okay. Oh, Moro is saying it is reassuring to see Auros using Auros, and it shows how much they trust and believe in their own tool. Thanks for that.
Yeah, we appreciate that more. I'm happy to see things like that. We certainly believe in the concept. It's something that, like I said, the things that we've been able to accomplish over the past few years using this concept and applying it to things in our business, I don't think we would have been able to do without using the knowledge aware technique. So it's been very beneficial to us, and we're certainly happy to hear that it makes you reassured that we are employing the technology ourselves.
Yeah. Now, Jimmy also says, great presentation, Josh. And how does Auros KS determine which projects are good candidates to implement in Auros? And how do you know where to start if you're a new customer?
It's another good question. We have a lot of information that we can, kind of provide to go deeper into detail of what I'm about to say. But I think in general, when you're deciding where to start, there's two things that you really have to balance. The first thing is the effort that's associated with the change. So if something, and it doesn't mean, if there's a lot of effort associated with the change, it doesn't mean you don't do the project, but it's a factor in making your decision. And the other main thing for me is going to be, the amount of value that's provided. So as you're going through and identifying areas that Auros could help, we have, kind of some helper information where, if there's a checklist that you have, that's probably a good place for an assessment. If you have lessons learned, there's probably a good place for assessments. If you need to trace information or you have multiple stakeholders coming together to make a decision, that's a good place. And there's some other things as well. But once you identify those assessments, taking the amount of effort that's going to take to manage the change, balancing that with the value that's going to be given to the organization, I think understanding those two things will help you to make your decision on where to start. But again, unfortunately, it's not an exact science, and there's some trade-offs to selecting one project versus the next. And it's really understanding what the balance between those two items are that allows you to pick a project and then it be successful.
Josh, can you actually define seed project for us?
Yeah, so the seed project is the terminology that we use. A lot of people would call it a proof of concept, but a seed project is taking the information or taking a workflow and onboarding it into Auros, or to use the knowledge aware approach. So it kind of starts with understanding where you want to start. So to Jimmy's question that was a little bit earlier, how do you figure out where to start? That's all part of the seed project for us. We want to scope it out. We then want to take that project. We want to learn as much about the process as we can while educating the people who own that process on what Auros does, on what the knowledge aware technique does. And then put that workflow into the software. We start to try it out. We get to a point where we think it's ready for production. We have other users come in, give us feedback. We make modifications to the process based on that feedback. And then we roll it into production. So we understand who the people are that are going to be using it, what kind of training needs to happen, what our expectation is going to be once we do train, when are we going to go live, all those kinds of things. That's the seed project. So from understanding or kind of coming up with where you want to start, all the way to transitioning a workflow into Auros and then into production, that would be the life cycle of the seed project.
Okay, great. We've got another question. Sung Myung, is asking, how do you see the global phenomenon on the knowledge management? Does Auros, is Auros only one driving company, or any information what I mean, the future trend? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's a good topic to kind of debate. I think that there's a lot of opinions on that. At Auros, our opinion, I think, would be that the knowledge aware technique is different from a lot of the ways that people try to manage knowledge today. A lot of the things Jeff talked a little bit about, search engines and the limitations that they have. What we really want to do with the knowledge aware approach is we want to deliver that information to people when and where they need it. We want to be able to collect the information for how they apply it, and then take that and learn from it, and then deliver those learnings back into the process. So we want to create this learning cycle, so to speak, which was talked about a little bit at the beginning of the conference. That's the approach that we think is the most beneficial, the most efficient. But there are a lot of different opinions on knowledge management and how that global phenomenon is going to develop over the next few years. Personally, I think the knowledge aware technique is the best way to go. But as you can tell, I'm obviously biased.
Yeah. And also just to let you guys know, to give you a hint, we're going to do that drawing really soon here at the end of the Q&A. So make sure to stick around. I'm not seeing any other questions come in at the moment. Just a lot of kudos to you. And Gaurav says, excellent presentation. It's amazing how much knowledge there is in the seed projects. Oh, one more, actually. Oh, two more. Oh boy, I spoke too soon. We have time. We have time. We'll leave it. Yeah. Marcia, or Marcia, can you share a link to a playbook on how Auros system works and its capabilities?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. I will take
okay.
Marcia's contact information down, and I'll send that information over to her.
Okay. Castellani is your last name. And then Thomas is asking, does Auros utilize the vitality measurement within your processes? If so, how?
Yeah, internally, so the vitality characteristic, if you're not familiar with it, is a health characteristic that's associated with a knowledge packet. So based on the way that it's been applied, based on the things that the authors put into it, based on the amount of times that users use it, how often do we adhere to the information in the knowledge packet, all that information is taken, and then we have an algorithm that'll put it together and give us a health score for the knowledge packet. So internally, we use the vitality to understand where are the areas in our process that really need to improve. Where are the areas in our process where we really struggle with, because maybe we don't do something as well as we've said it needs to be done. So that characteristic for us, we use it a lot in the seed project process or in the workflow onboarding process. And we also use it in the release software factory process. As the processes start to mature, I think the vitality characteristic has helped us out quite a bit in ways that we really wouldn't be able to find information from just a document-based approach where everything is just captured and stored somewhere in a document. So those are kind of the ways that we use the vitality characteristic internally.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, I think that timed out perfectly because we are ready for the drawing and I don't see any more questions. So we are randomly, I know it's virtual, but we are doing this randomly, trust us. So I'm just getting the name in now. All right, the winner today is Dave Matthews, Business Technology Officer from BAE Systems. So congratulations, Dave. We will reach out to you to arrange the shipment of your prize. And folks, we're doing this again tomorrow, again at a randomly selected time, and we'll choose another winner. So we certainly hope for many reasons that you'll be back with us tomorrow. And let me go ahead and post the survey link, and you will need to copy and paste it in order for it to go through. We did have one last question though in the meantime. David is asking, any chance of new dynamic colors becoming available for the Auros background screens?
Yeah, good question, David. We do have some options in the software right now. We can reach out to you and kind of show you how to configure that, and then be happy to have a conversation about, if that doesn't meet the needs of what you're asking for, what we could potentially do to incorporate something in the software moving forward. Okay,
great. Well, thanks for your feedback and questions and engagement on this. And please do, again, copy and paste that survey. We really do value your feedback. It's about this particular session, and we'll take those all into account. So I want to let you know that our next and final general session of today, and in fact, the last session of today, starts at 4:25. So we've got about 5 minutes, and that's going to be Tim Glau, engineering specialist, knowledge management from, we've got a couple folks. Yeah, Tim is knowledge management from Caterpillar and IKAA board member. And then we also have Marcus Fisher, VP of engineering from ZF, TRW, and IKAA board president, and they're going to talk about introduction to the Knowledge Aware certification program. Right? So we'll see you there in just 5 minutes. Thanks so much.